Welcome to The Art of Medicine, the program that explores the arts, business, and clinical aspects of the practice of medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Wilner. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Christina Gomez, a gastrointestinal medical oncologist and author of Stopped in My Tracks, a physician's collection of cancer patients' quotes. But before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsor, locumstory.com. Maybe you're curious about locums and how it might fit into your career story, but you know all the different reasons physicians choose locums and how it works for them? At locumstory.com, you can hear firsthand stories as diverse as physicians themselves. There's not one solution for everyone. The variety of opportunities might surprise you. Locum Story is an unbiased educational resource. It has tools that let you explore trends in your specialty and compare different locums agencies. There's even a simple quiz to see if locums is right for you. Do your own research at locumstory.com. It's easy. And now to my special guest. Welcome, Dr. Gomez.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, one of my favorite things to do on this program is feature physician authors, because I think in the tradition of, William Carlos Williams and Richard Selzer and many, many others, there's an intimacy about writing, and there's an intimacy about the patient physician relationship. And when I saw that you had a book based on 15 years of meticulous note taking about your patients, I thought that was worth the look. So, what's the title of your book?
The book is Stopped in My Tracks.
Stopped in
Um,
My Tracks. Okay, so I like that. It's sort of visual and impactful and visceral. I think there are things that certainly when I make rounds at the hospital that do stop you in your tracks. Okay, but before we get to the book, tell me a little bit about yourself and your training and what you're doing. I see there's some Yale in your background, but what are you doing now? Okay.
so right now I'm a GI medical oncologist. So my focus is in GI cancers. And I'm here in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm at Banner MD Anderson. Prior to that, I was at Yale, and there was a highlight of my career to be faculty there, also in the GI oncology department. A little bit of academics and teaching, and a little bit of art of medicine when I tapped into healer's art. And we can talk a little more about that because I quote or I mention Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen and how she was a mentor of sorts just by following her career and her writings. But before all of that, born and raised in Miami, and I stayed. I was honored to be at the University of Miami, did my training there, and I'm one of those lifer kids, right? I stayed there for my entire training, med school, internship, residency, and fellowship. It's kind of like I grew roots, and it didn't leave until I broke out to Connecticut. So born and raised in Miami, did all my training there. That was masterful because I saw so much, and I actually also tap into that in the book. It's inner city, the access or the bridge to Central America and the Caribbean. We saw patients with very advanced disease or diseases that maybe we didn't see here in the States as often. So I feel very prepared, and I was, they sent me forth, and I chose oncology, or it chose me, as we all say. It was the patients, and then to be able to come full circle and now share with you that I'm writing about these very patients is a dream when you mention physician and author in the same sentence.
Great. That's great. Now, I relate to your training because I trained at Los Angeles County Hospital for 2 years, which is a bridge to Central America. At least in those days, it was. And we did see many, many cases of advanced disease that you would typically not see in a private hospital because the patients had not had access to care. for one reason or another, which of course is a big topic these days, to make sure patients have, in some cases we have the care, but it's getting the patient and the care together. It's kind of it's not really a medical problem, it's more of a societal problem. But taking care of those patients, and in fact, I've gravitated to that population. I've worked locum tenens at Henneman County Hospital in Minnesota, and
Okay.
now I'm a division director of neurology at Regional One Health in Memphis, which is also the county hospital, the catchment hospital, the hospital that people go for trauma, but also when they don't have insurance. And it's a special patient population, but I do find it particularly rewarding and sometimes very challenging as a physician, because they do have advanced disease, and can be a real challenge, number one, to figure it out, and then to institute treatment. Now, before we get into the book, I have a question. I remember as a medical student, oncology just seemed to be like the worst possible specialty that you could pick. All your patients are dropping dead. You can't even build up a practice because you're losing them left and right. And it's always a sad story. And why would anyone choose that? Or you, for example?
Yeah. So as I kind of hinted to you earlier, it's a perfect segue. I was called to medicine early on, but growing in medicine, I realized was really science and art, right? And so if I can tap into the art first, at Jackson Memorial Hospital, rotating as an intern, as a medical student, rotating through other specialties, it was the cancer patients that I was drawn to, right? So I was on a cardiology rotation and we needed to see a cancer patient because of toxicity, or we were in psychiatry and it was the cancer patient who presented. So what I found is that cancer patients spoke to me uniquely. I think there was this universal and very unique experience about being in that sacred or intimate space of life and death, of um, being stopped in your own tracks with respect to your health or an uncertain future. So the art of that, patients who wanted to continue therapy despite toxicities that were life-threatening in and of themselves. So the art of that pulled me in. And then I was training in the early 2000s, and it was at the cusp of oncology's breakthrough. Tyrosine kinase inhibitors, monoclonal antibodies were just being introduced. Targeted therapies, true lock and key, right? HER2 receptor and HER2 antibody, or things of the sort, where all the things we were learning with respect to the cell cycle and cell growth, and words like apoptosis and metastases and breaking cell surface membranes, all of that started to be manipulated in a unique way. And I knew that I was at the cusp of something big. I didn't know what we'd be able to see now, 15, 16, 17 years later. But I knew that there was something there. So art and science drew me into oncology.
So let me just add that I did an internship in internal medicine because I was going to be an internal medicine doctor. In those days, that seemed to me to be the way to have kind of global acceptance of patients and know everything. And I went through all of the rotations and they were all great, but none of them really spoke to me in any particular way. One wasn't better than the other: cardiology, renal, pulmonary. It's all the same. It was all great, but it was all the same. So I eventually, at the end of the year, I took a hiatus. I stopped my residency and I wrote a book. I said, I need a break. It was also very intense in those days, no time for writing. So I wrote a book and I went back. And during that year, I had to support myself. I was licensed. So I worked in the emergency room as an emergency room physician, which I wasn't particularly well trained for, but that's another story. I managed. And I discovered that the neurology patients, the ones who came in with even dizziness or double vision or numbness, on their cheek, those were fascinating. Trouble walking, and so neurology stood out. And so I've completed my internal medicine residency and I'm board certified. And then I went on to do a second residency in neurology and eventually a fellowship in epilepsy. So that's part of the advice I give to my residents and medical students. Well, the residents know, but the medical students say, well, what are you going to do? They say, oh, I don't know. I said, well, you got to find something that really, because they're thinking of practical things, night call or salary, or it's like you're going to be doing this for a long time. So you got to find something that really you respond to and that makes you feel good about doing it. And then, of course, the art of medicine, I think more and more neglected and more important would be my bottom line. So the book, tell us about the book.
So, first year medical school, we were asked, or we were introduced to physician authors. Perry Klass, Rachel Naomi Remen, of course, William Carlos Williams. And I thought, well, who's got time for that? But I was fascinated by it. In that class, we were introduced to what you introduced, that sacred space, that unique relationship in all our relationships in the world, right? I think the Buddha even talks about mother, father, older sister, younger brother, older friend, younger friend. But physician and patient, a unique and a universal experience, as we are all invited to be patients at one point. But I was introduced to that moment and said, wow, there's something there. Right after that, we were asked to keep a notebook to write down the pearls of knowledge, the things we'd learned, the things that stood out, the things you were to remember forever, the things you'd learn at the bedside, a physical exam finding, the sound of a murmur, whatever, the presentation, the paraneoplastic syndrome, whatever you saw, write it down. It was before iPhones and all this technology. So I'm aging myself a little bit. But Dr. Wilner, I found that little booklet was empty. Night call, hours, catching up, studying, reading the latest paper. I never had time to jot something down. Fast forward into my fellowship, what stopped me in my tracks, what made me pause and say, I can't forget that. I need to jot that down, quote this patient, were the words that they said in that moment of encounter, either at a moment of diagnosis or end of life, or wit and wisdom, or wisdom wrapped up in wit and humor. The patients stopped me time and again, and I found myself on a paper towel or on the exam room tissue paper, scribbling their exact words. In that moment, I asked them, may I quote you? I hope to write a book one day. I think I meant it jokingly. Like kids say the darndest things, patients say the truest things. And so you mentioned that I was jotting them down diligently. I was diligent in quoting what they said, but it was really on Post-its or on ripped pieces of tissue paper. And I had a little box and I kept them all in there. And
Any
then,
idea why these words were so powerful for you?
I look at that often because I read and reread the book and I say, why this quote? Or maybe every physician hears these things. I asked my editor time and again, is there something here really, quote after quote? And so I think that the art was in how they strung words together, one. Two, how they expressed this experience, and they became teachers themselves, either to me on how to explain a toxicity of a chemotherapy, or now I quote and use them. Hey, a patient describes neuropathy as having her feet wrapped in bubble wrap. The unique experience, the poetry in it, if you will, the romantic, right? Or the patient who said, my chemotherapy was like sitting by a Christmas tree and they would just change the light bulbs. Right? Who talks like that? Or the patient who said to me, look, I don't really want this chemo, but she didn't say it like that. She said, when it's my time, just hook me up to an IV of Prosecco. And she told me so much there. She told me, look, I don't want to do this. I don't want to prolong this. Two, she was really admitting how much alcohol she really took in, and that she was at peace with it. And I joke at the end of that page that I saw her at a nearby restaurant enjoying her cocktail one afternoon, and I said, she's the truth in the words, the power in the encounter and in the sharing stopped me in my tracks, and I recorded them.
I think your patients are very lucky because your note taking exemplifies the difference between hearing and listening. So I think because, well, I'm sure you listen very carefully to your patients, as every physician should. But I think because you had this extra antenna listening for exactly what they're going to say, I bet you paid even more attention to them. And, when you pay attention to people, you get more back. And, I always try and meet people kind of where they are in our county population. Uh, it's fair to say that a lot of these patients and I would not cross paths were it not for our patient physician relationship. So I have to work hard to try and find some common ground so that I'm not just the doctor in the white coat standing here and they're the patient, lying in the bed. So I have a lot of patients who drink too much alcohol. And so I've started asking them. They'll reluctantly admit it because everyone knows you're not supposed to drink too much alcohol, but a lot of people do. And so I asked them, "What do you like to drink?" And it's kind of unexpected for them because they're expecting a lecture about, well, 4 martinis a day is too much, and their eyes like open up. Oh, what do I like? Well, I like, this brand or that brand, and we have a long conversation, and it opens up the way for me to get more information about their disease and about their symptoms, because now they found someone who's listening, and they have a lot to say, but people are guarded, so it's a way of pulling down the barriers. So I think when you're sitting there and you're listening so carefully to what they're saying, I was flipping through your book and I saw a great one that kind of summed up one patient's experience. I guess you had a long discussion about whether they should have chemotherapy, or not, and it was a pretty dire straits. And the patient said something like, "Well, it's the bag or the box." The bag being the chemotherapy and the box meaning the coffin. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what it boiled down to for that patient. So I thought that was memorable.
And you can see why that stopped me in my tracks. Here I am being ginger or compassionate or even in myself, right? Poetic in how to get to this truth. And she just summed it up for me, stopped me in my tracks. As I left, she was up in Connecticut. When I left there 2 years ago, she was fine and disease free. And so
Oh, wow.
she made the choice, and she was okay. So I love when we talk about these quotes. I guess this is the gift to the author. These patients come alive for me, and I'm transported back to that moment of encounter, to that patient, to all that we walked. And I pray that that's what happens when when you all read the book, when we read the book, when I gift the book to either someone going through this or a caregiver or someone in hospice or in pastoral care, or ideally to medical students, right? That for a second we're transported to the magic that can happen or does happen every day in an exam room. And you mentioned how we don't talk about this enough, and I think the art is in our relationship that is unique. Patients and physicians, sacred ground.
I'm going to go so far as your strategy of listening and getting one sentence, because usually that's all it is, right? In your book, it's just one phrase or two, is maybe an antidote to burnout, because, sometimes it's another patient, it's another problem, the other one's waiting. But if you have that extra antenna up for something special, you can remind yourself that, well, actually, this is a special opportunity to see what I can learn about the art of medicine rather than this is just an other RVU that I have to get done so I can go home. And it doesn't take much time, right? I mean, it takes 30 seconds to write it down, but it takes, 20 minutes to listen carefully. I always like with a psychiatrist term. In fact, I've interviewed several psychiatrists for this on this program for one reason or another, of active listening. You're not just listening, you're listening for particular, like you said, that patient Prosecco. Well, right away, that's telling you that alcohol is high on her list of vocabulary words. So it's coming to the front for a reason. And, a lot of people are indirect. I grew up as a pretty indirect, blunt person. Tried to work on that, but most people are not that way. They don't always just tell you what the answer is. It's sort of a roundabout, or they don't tell you at all. You have to kind of figure it out, and that's part of the challenge, I think, of being a physician. I want to get back. I asked you, how can you be an oncologist when all your patients are disasters? And your answer was that actually that's not true. Is that with the advances now that we have, there are patients like your patient in Connecticut who actually get better. So
Yeah.
I would say cancer, I mean, in the 50s was a death sentence, when I was born. But now in 2020s, there's actually hope for not everybody, but there are clear advances, making it worthwhile to be the one who can say, well, you're too far gone, but you're not, and there's stuff that we can actually do. So I think that's pretty exciting. But I want to go to
It,
the other side. It
it,
is, right? It
it
is.
really is. It
That's why
really
you
is.
read the journals and go to meetings because there's more and more and more, right?
It really is. It really is. Just last week, a new drug for colon cancer was approved by the FDA in patients who have received multiple lines of therapy. We didn't have it. We didn't have it before Thanksgiving, and we have it now. So, buying time, resetting the clock,
Hmm.
getting to this holiday season, getting to the new year. So, birthdays and holidays is my goal, right? Whatever the patient really desires, and we're able to do that even in advanced stages. Which, unfortunately, I thought is where also this conversation was going. We're finding younger and younger people with advanced stages in disease, but at least we've got more and more options uh, to cycle and recycle. So yes.
Yeah, I've actually been impressed. I have a close friend who's a couple years older than me. And anyway, he was diagnosed with advanced stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And, I heard all this on the phone, and he had all of the symptoms, and he was, death's door. So they signed him up for some chemotherapy every couple of weeks, and he had, drag himself there. And I thought, well, this is a big waste of time. This was February of last year. Anyway, the guy's still kicking, and I never thought he'd make it to Christmas. And now apparently he's going shopping and he's doing stuff with his wife. He's not cured by any stretch of the imagination, but somehow he's remained functional. And apparently the thing is maybe not stopped in its tracks. I don't know, but it's not growing. And he's thanks to modern medicine. So, and he's not suffering. It's not just a matter of, dragging out his life another 6 months in misery. It's actually prolonged his life. So I think I'm an epilepsy specialist. And I always tell my patients, well, if you're going to have epilepsy, it's better to have it in 2023 when we've got 20 drugs, than it was in 2013 when we only had 10 drugs. I mean, it matters.
And there's art, right? Living with cancer. And how well do we live it? And how do you want to live it? Everyone is, again, unique to each individual, as unique as our treatments, as unique as their belief system, as unique as their habits, like this patient at the restaurant. But living with cancer, and there's the art that we're invited to, or invited to bring the patients with us.
All right, so that's perfect because there's one more topic that I wanted to sort of touch on, and also about being oncologist, because you do have many patients who are not going to do well, and you know that from day one. So, how, what's your strategy to support patients and families at the end of life? What have you found that works?
Wow. So it goes back to maybe the same things we're talking about, right? Really listening, radically listening, actively listening to what's important to them, whatever that may be, which is dying well or living longer, um, exhausting all options, no matter the cost, physical cost to them, or even financial cost, if we're honest. Um, so really tapping into what's important to them. And that's been a lesson for me, right? Learning when to say, hey, I support you implicitly, explicitly, because I support you completely, whatever you decide. The patients that want to travel to exhaust options that are not yet approved here, or trials that aren't available here. So that's been a gift to me as a person, to grow as a person and grow as a physician, really meeting them there, tapping into what's important to them spiritually, this sense of purpose, or creator, returning to a creator, or what we leave behind. I think I'd like to maybe quote one of my patients who is in the book. She was very young, and I was at her bedside. I had been called in again by the team and saying, hey, we don't think she's getting it. Can you please come and have this conversation again? And the girl was in her 30s, or a young woman in her 30s.
Wow.
I pulled up a chair, and I'll be honest, I didn't know if she was having a hard time, and we had already had this discussion, and the team is calling me back in, right? The burden that I was carrying when I walked in, and the sun was shining through her window. She was resting comfortably. I pulled up a chair. There was this calming silence. And the patients take care of us in as much as we take care of them. I think she got it. She knew that I was struggling with words. And she said to me, hey, Dr. Gomez, energy can neither be created nor destroyed. I'm not going anywhere. I'm just changing. Right? So here's this patient quoting me science. And all of it was art, right? As a young oncologist trying to do end of life to a young woman younger than me, talking about futile options, talking about embracing the natural transition. And here she was quoting the greatest of philosophies, right? That we change, that we become earth or stardust or whatever. But so I think that's been the gift for me in meeting patients at end of life.
That's a great story. Probably the team thought she didn't get it because she was so serene and didn't realize that she's dying. But in fact, she had come to grips with it in her own way. That's a great
Yeah,
story.
yeah. And circling back, you mentioned this as antidote. We're called to have different experiences room to room. One is a success story, and one can be an end of life story. And so how does our heart uh, change the channel, right? And I think you highlighted using patients' words, and that's how this book was born. At the core of pandemic, at Yale, physicians were scared, physicians were anxious, physicians were stressed, and we had a writing hour. And I shared that I had collected these quotes, and the author that was leading the writing hour said, Christy, let's meet. I want to hear more. And so not only the way that I cope, right? Patients' words that heal me. I'm a lover of words and quotes by definition. But literally, the book was born as a burnout antidote in the greatest stressors of our time, the COVID-19 pandemic.
So if someone in the audience wants to read the book, where can they get it?
So ChristinaGomezMD.com is my website, and it's got a couple of options on purchasing the book through my distributor, through Amazon. Again, stopped in my tracks. Christina Gomez MD, a physician's collection of cancer patients' quotes.
Wonderful. Now, we're going to wrap up. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Oh, that we're truly artists at the core, that if we tap into how much we study the science of medicine, if we continue to bow to the art, then we're in sync. Then we're whole beings. And so, at least that's what I try to do. And it's where I'm trying to grow as a physician and as a person. And so, I'm honored to be invited. I'm honored by your podcast and program, and I'm honored by this title. And to have me on the art of medicine, really, I bow to this. Thank you.
Well, that honor definitely goes both ways. So, Dr. Christina Gomez, thank you for being a guest on The Art of Medicine.
Thank you.
Before we close, I'd like to give another thanks to our sponsor, locumstory.com, a resource where providers can get real, unbiased answers about locum tenens. I'm Dr. Andrew Wilner. See you next time.
This program is hosted, edited, and produced by Andrew Wilner, MD, FACP, FAAN. Guests receive no financial compensation for their appearance on The Art of Medicine. Andrew Wilner, MD, is Associate Professor of Neurology at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, Memphis, Tennessee. Views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on this program belong solely to Dr. Wilner and his guests, and not necessarily to their employers, organizations, or other group or individual. While this program intends to be informative, it is meant for entertainment purposes only. The Art of Medicine does not offer professional financial, legal, or medical advice. Dr. Wilner and his guests assume no responsibility or liability for any damages, financial or otherwise, that arise in connection with consuming this program's content. Thanks for watching. For more episodes of The Art of Medicine, please subscribe. www.andrewwilner.com